All right, I think while Orlin gets the presentation going, I just wanted to figure out real quick where you guys are coming from and what you actually would like to learn today. How many of you guys are developers, web developers? Okay, quite a few. How many of you are mobile app developers, stuff like that? Who is not a developer here? Oh, good. Perfect. Because I'm not a developer either. I'm one of the founders of ESUS, and we are a Boston-based startup company working in the enterprise infrastructure software space, providing a communication solution for mid-size, large enterprise. Red Hat is one of our customers. We have a number of other tech companies. We have a whole set of universities who adopt our software, some financial services companies, and we started out in the US and then started expanding into Europe, and many of our customers have taken us international. So we provide communication services. You could look at this as Skype for enterprise, but it's something an enterprise can actually deploy. And we're specialized in the server backend of this, and there's a lot of technology in there. I don't know how many of you know what SIP is, Session Initiation Protocol. That's a big part of it. XMPP is a big part of it for messaging presence in the chat. And we combine that into a cloud-based software solution. WebRTC is the periphery, is the client side. And what we would like to offer today is a more high-level discussion around what WebRTC is, where it came from, what its potential is in the industry, why you might want to care about it, and where it's going. I'm not going to go into what I would call the bit level and really talk about all the details in terms of how you use this API. I think you're smarter than I am to figure this out. What I would like to do is sort of give you the vision and discuss with you what the potential is of this and why big companies like Google, for instance, and Cisco and others are so focused on this. Does that make sense, everyone? All right, and I will start out here, and Chrissy, who runs marketing at ESUS, will present the back end of this to talk a little bit about the application of this and some of the examples of what this can be used for. Okay. All right. So what is WebRTC? WebRTC is real-time communications. That's what it stands for. It's a new standard, and it's very important that it's a standard that is developed jointly between the W3C and the IETF, has been driven in that standards body, or in those two standards bodies, probably for 2+ years. So this is something that has been going on for a little while. It started with Google, I think, realizing that real-time communications is something very essential. It is something very essential to the user experience. If you want to give intimacy to users, you need presence. You need the ability to communicate in real time, whether that is with chat, with voice, with video, with screen sharing, with real-time document editing, or whatever it is. So Google realized that this is really an important key technology, and they looked around and tried to figure out, well, how do we do this? How can we get this into a browser? Because that's how what their world revolves around. And if you look around, or at that time looked around in the industry, there were a number of companies that literally specialized all their corporate life on building what I would call a soft phone, an application that you would load on a desktop and use to make a call, voice or video or something like this. And building such a soft phone is a hugely complicated thing to do. It requires a ton of technology. It requires codecs. It requires packet loss concealment. It requires jitter adjustment. It requires a lot of things. So it's a very complicated thing to do. And Google went out and tried to figure out what exists, and they ended up buying a company called Global IP Sounds, or GIPS, based in Sweden in Europe. And this was the company that typically provided the middleware, the hardcore technology for other companies who wanted to build these software applications. So they took this and started looking at how you could integrate this into a browser. And they could have done that and had this in Chrome. It would have been a great Google application. But I think they felt that there's really a potential to transform the industry. So what they did then is they made it open source. So they took this whole technology they just bought and put it out there under a very liberal open source license. And in addition to that, they gave a free patent license grant to everyone who used it, so that they tried to the extent possible to basically circumvent all the different patents that were laying around and providing a minefield around all these codecs and things. So they made it open source and freely available, and then started integrating this into a browser, so that you basically end up taking more or less the entire complexity of building these real-time apps out of the equation. It's in the browser. So now you take HTML, you take some JavaScript, and you build, I don't know, a phone, or you build a video conferencing client, or you build a screen sharing app, or you build whatever you want to build that requires real-time exchange of information. And that is really a groundbreaking change. That is a fundamental departure from how this worked previously. Does this make sense? All right. So this is a quote from Phil Edholm, and I don't know whether you guys know Phil, but Phil is sort of an interesting guy. He was CTO at Mortel of all places for quite some time, and he's independent now. And he coined this quote that was published in Node.js, saying WebRTC and HTML5 enable the same transformation for real time that the original browser did for information. Now that's a big statement, and I think a lot of people would agree with Phil that the web, as it absorbs real-time communications, makes a huge leap forward in terms of its utility and value to end users, absorbing what used to be a separate industry called the telephony industry into the IT world, into the web world, into the world accessible to startups and web developers like yourselves. So this is a big, big change. And obviously with all big changes, there is always controversy around this, right? Not everyone agrees. Some companies have something at stake that they could lose. So I'd like to just give you a brief introduction into some of the debate and some of the controversy that's obviously going on around this. I think a lot of people, when Skype came out, thought that, well, Skype will be the end of telecoms. You won't need Verizon anymore, we have Skype. And Skype was hugely successful, it still is. And now that it got absorbed into Microsoft, I think there are more and more competitors around. Like Tango is one, Viber is another one that just, I think, passed 200 million users. So that the consumer end of things on the web have now worked for quite some time. It didn't mean that telecoms went away. I guess most of you still have a phone at home, right? So it didn't really change all that much. But it created a new capability. And WebRTC now does this in a standards-based way, in a way that an enterprise can adopt. So now suddenly, enterprises can use this, while Skype really only is useful for maybe very small enterprises and people at home. Now, a lot of people agree on WebRTC. I mean, Google definitely does. Cisco is very active in WebRTC. Mozilla is very active with Firefox and the things they do. And there's a growing industry consortium around this. Ericsson is part of this, Huawei is part of this. A whole number of companies have jumped on that bandwagon. So as I said, it's a soft phone in a browser. It's massive complexity reduction. You could call it a next generation phone network, because now the communication can be peer-to-peer, specifically as it relates to media, on an IP infrastructure without ever going into a telephony infrastructure. It's real-time everywhere and with everything. It doesn't have to be voice, it can be video or screen sharing or basically anything. And it is, to an extent, making or reinventing a $2 trillion industry called, the telecoms and PBX industry. And, and I think these phone companies are really struggling to catch up to this. If you, look at an IT department today, then the IT department is only in a very reluctant way going to be responsible for this old phone system. Usually you have a facilities group, or you have a separate organization that might potentially report into IT, but it's a separate organization taking care of this. And it lives in a completely different environment. It lives in it requires different skill set for people to manage. It costs a lot of money. And at the end of the day, the only thing it really does well is allow you to make a call. Right? All right, so maybe I can go into a few more technical details here and explain real quick at sort of the block diagram level, how this is supposed to work. So what you see here is basically a browser here. Okay, so that would be one browser. And then you have another browser over here, and you have sort of the world in between. Okay, and you can see here that this browser is split into two pieces. There is the browser itself down here, which includes with WebRTC all the media processing, and that includes all the codecs. It includes the RTP channel. It includes the NAT-traverse that you need, and all these other pretty sophisticated technologies to capture media from a microphone or a camera, and then transport it across a network to the other end. And media transport is usually peer-to-peer. If you have too much NAT in between or something, you might end up with a relay. But the desired solution is that media will be established peer-to-peer. Now, the signaling will typically run through a network and through a server backend, right? Something needs to provide the capability to find the other party, and therefore these clients would register with a server, like you do in SIP or with XMPP, and with that you can then do call routing and establish connections. And in the standardization process, there was a lot of discussion whether the protocol required for signaling should be mandated, right? That this is the protocol, and then you put it into the browser, and that's the end of it. Or whether there should be enough flexibility for people, companies, to use the signaling protocol they want. And what the standards body ended up doing is splitting it. I think Google is leaning more towards using XMPP for call processing. A lot of other people use SIP. You can use your own. But this moved into a JavaScript-based application. There are more and more companies, there are more and more open source projects that provide these libraries in JavaScript that you basically load into your web app, into your browser, to then execute the signaling part. So these two pieces, basically what's in the browser and what is your app, makes up what you need client-side entirely. And this app becomes less and less complex. I mean, a lot of this is building the user interface, right, the look and feel in HTML, and maybe a few other things required. But the heavy lifting is done down here in the browser, and all the media processing is. The cloud then, as I said, requires typically a SIP server or an XMPP server, and that is still the difficulty today. There are not too many of these things readily available, specifically not supporting WebSockets, which is the preferred interface between the browser and the server backend in this case. So you need WebSocket-based SIP transport or WebSocket-based XMPP transport. The encryption of the media is a bit special, and things like that. Some of the codecs are a little special. I'll talk about that in a minute. But this is the typical environment that you need. And as I said, the server backend is what enterprises increasingly deploy as infrastructure, not a point product where companies tell you how to use it, but as a piece of standards-based open infrastructure, so that the bring your own device concept really unfolds, that companies and employees can then use all kinds of clients, including clients that completely live inside of a web page. So browser support is obviously the key here, and this is an evolving story. We think that 2013 is really the year where WebRTC becomes ubiquitous on different platforms. I think Google was the first one to put this into Chrome on desktops, and it's been in there now for a couple of months. Firefox was not far behind. I think right now the big discussion is how to get this onto mobile platforms, and there is a Firefox out on Android. Google is working on it. So this year, this will proliferate from desktop browsers to mobile browsers. And I think the value of this on a mobile device is even bigger than it is on a desktop device, because building soft phone applications for mobile devices is very complicated. It's all native apps, and therefore you build one here and then a totally different one over here. And if you can build a web app instead based on WebRTC, you basically build one and then can use the code from platform to platform. And with real-time apps like this was never possible until now. If you look at the Apple story, I think Apple is quiet right now. They haven't really said much this way or that. I'm pretty sure that this technology will be important for Apple, but they haven't really put up a flag yet and planted it anywhere. And as I said, Microsoft is on a different track. They built their own, but Google in the meantime built a thing called Google Frame, which is a plugin into Internet Explorer that basically brings Chrome into Internet Explorer, so that all the nice things that are in Chrome can be used with an Internet Explorer GUI at the end of the day. So I think this is, at a high level, the browser landscape, and as I said, we expect this to evolve quite a bit over the next months, probably till the end of the year. This is the sort of official high-level architecture. I'm not going to go into all the details, other than to say, if you just look at the API level here, that's pretty simple. You establish connections and things like that. But under the hood, there's a lot. There is a voice engine, a video engine, a transport engine. You can see different codecs here, different video codecs. Google is very much on BP8, as you probably would expect. Other people are more on H.264. But there's a lot of technology under the hood. There is encryption for transport here, all kinds of things. So this is a very complex piece of technology that, at the end of the day, will be integrated into a browser here. On the codec side, and I apologize, we had, I think, these slides created for widescreen, and we also don't have a widescreen here, so the format is a bit off. But there is a big debate about codecs. Codecs are very political because a lot of royalty payments and patents relate to codecs. There are voice codecs, there are video codecs, there are many more different codecs on the voice side. That's this slide here. And you can sort of see the different codecs that were developed over the years. The interesting thing here is that there is a new one called Opus, which again is open source and should be patent-free. You never really know. But the further to the upper left here the curve is, the better it is, because you really want low bandwidth, which is down here, and high quality. And you can see that this Opus codec really meets the front line here and offers superb performance. On the video side, there is this BP8 codec that is patent-free and open source, provided by Google, and a lot of companies require H.264, which requires a license, and then Microsoft has their own RT audio and RT video, which also requires a license as well. But from a video perspective, I don't think there is a big quality difference. I could go on and talk more about the specialities of H.264 as it relates to SVC and some of these new methods of creating different bandwidth streams from one encoder. There's quite a bit of movement with codecs here, and I would expect this battle to continue. And the reason this is important is because if you have two endpoints and these two endpoints cannot agree on codec, they usually negotiate and try to find one that works. And if they can't agree on codec, well, then you have to anchor the media somewhere in the network and transcode it. And that requires a relay force that can transcode and a lot of CPU horsepower if you want to do this at scale. Okay. And I think I'll hand it over to Chrissy to talk about some of the apps.
Okay. So now that Martin's giving you the very technical description of what WebRTC can do, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about how WebRTC is going to change what websites can do. I guess most of the room are web developers, and so this is really going to change your job in many, many significant ways to the point where WebRTC is going to be something you're going to need to be familiar with. Phil Edholm made a really good comment to Martin and myself just the other day, is that websites are going to become a key customer service function, because when you think about it, there are going to be scores, if not on a major enterprise website, hundreds of endpoints that can become WebRTC enabled, and clients are going to want that. They're going to want every endpoint, maybe every product description page on an e-commerce page, to have an endpoint, a WebRTC endpoint, so that people can call into their customer service. And so, forget click to chat on sites. It's going to become click to call, and it could become click to call in a very short order. So it's going to become an essential part of the web developer's toolkit to be able to come up with an elegant WebRTC way of handling this new client demand, to build in a click to call WebRTC endpoint on websites. And if you think back a couple of years ago, social media was what clients really wanted integrated into their websites, and you had to think of a really good way to do that made sense for their overall project. And now it's going to be WebRTC as well as social media. And so we're loading down websites with more and more bells and whistles without trying to load them down without buying too much more time or budget or bandwidth. And it's really part of the evolution to the website as an application. So even if it's not a web app, even if it's not SaaS, websites are functioning more and more for a lot of companies as an application. It's where, it's our user portal at ESUS, and more and more as we get to integrate WebRTC, it's going to become yet another thing that you're going to have to plan for when you build a consumer-facing website, or indeed even an enterprise-facing website. It's not going to be something like, right now, it's still up in the air, there really hasn't been a standard release, you don't have to worry about it, nobody's banging on your door saying, hey, I want WebRTC, I can't live without it as part of my website. But our prediction is, and it's a reasonable one, is that within the next less than 5 years, a website without WebRTC is going to become like a website without any kind of social interaction, or without even a Twitter button. So it's going to become normalized for people. People are going to, Firefox has already started to release that you can have WebRTC on your mobile phone. So it's going to become a very important part of mobile development. Consumers are going to get used to it. It's going to be driven by the consumer, the need for WebRTC. Firefox was talking about recently how they're going to have a WebRTC enabled app that's going to enable people to file share while video chatting with each other. So this goes beyond anything that is currently available, and soon. I'll just stand here and distract you from Merlin's login screen in the meantime. So it's going to become a normalized endpoint, a normalized way consumers are going to expect to interact with websites. And so just as now people are going to expect, and they're going to freak out if you don't have a responsive website, and you're seeing more and more people, like if they go to your website on their mobile devices and they see that it's not responsive, they're like, these people don't know what they're doing. The website's not responsive. And it's consumers who are driving that. You saw a lot of organizations, other than, who remembers when the Boston Globe kind of introduced their responsive website, and everybody oohed and awed, and we were all so excited, and now organizations that don't have a responsive website look like they really just don't have their act together. And that was consumer driven. Well, that's exactly what's happening with WebRTC. Enterprise, as Martin mentioned, is definitely kind of up in the air as to whether they're comfortable with WebRTC or not. And consumers are going to be the ones who are going to start using these applications, and it's going to be mobile driven. And it's going to be yet another way in which the mobile web is going to take over from the static web. We already are seeing that in certain industries, mobile traffic is outweighing desktop traffic. And I think WebRTC, by integrating voice with file sharing with the web, is going to drive that even more so that your mobile phone, the consumer's mobile phone, is going to be their single point of interaction with you. And WebRTC is going to become as essential as responsive design to get a website. Going back to desktop and going back to enterprise, another very, very cool thing that you can do with WebRTC that we're working on here at EZUS, not to give ourselves a plug, but we really want to share this very cool thing we're working on, is that you can easily now add voice or video or screen share or chat capabilities to your productivity apps to make them all the more productive. So one thing we're working on right now, and I'll show you in another slide, is we're integrating it with email, Outlook, and Zimbra, so that from hands up, just to give you an example of what this is going to accomplish. And we are already doing this outside of WebRTC. It's called Unified Communications, and there's a couple of players in the space, but WebRTC is going to make it that much more elegant. How many times have you been on a 75 email chain where everybody and their cousin has been copied, and you're discussing something that could have been handled in a 5-minute conversation, and you're really, really, really tired of it? Yeah, everybody's nodding. So basically, what integration of voice and video with Outlook and Zimbra, which is, let's face it, most of us are using these applications for our work email, is going to do is you're going to be able to push a button, and you can already do that with proprietary solutions. You can already do it with our open solution. But WebRTC, I guess, is going to make it easier. You push a button and you decide, you know what, I'm just going to call everybody on this email chain, or half of the people, only the important players on this email chain. You spin up a file sharing video and voice session, and you take care of it in a sort of simpler, more elegant version of Google Hangout in 2 minutes. Forget the email chain. So that's what integrating voice and video and chat can do with email. You can integrate it with your customer management system. So not only can you now, once this has become more reality, we're already working on some of these things, not only can you now call your customers from within Salesforce, but if they call you, you can log that from your website. So say somebody's, I don't know, shopping at Sears or some online retailer, and they're a real complainer. They bought a lawnmower last week and they complained about that, and this week they bought a dryer and they complained about that. They keep calling in, there could be a record of that, and then that person could be given additional discounts. And so it makes the website and the call center more easily integrated, which can potentially save a large retailer billions. And like I said, it's not just voice and video, but also screen sharing, so you can really show people what you're looking at as well as talking to them. And I think communications enablement, as Martin has said, is going to become the standard for web applications. And Martin will definitely share some more information on that. It's going to become the standard for productivity apps. It's not going to be enough that you just have your CRM system or your document management system. It's going to become a necessity to be able to collaborate with people. So right quickly, I want to show you something that we're doing, integrating WebRTC to bring voice, video, and screen sharing right into Zimbra. Zimbra being the VMware email application. And you can see here what I was talking about terminating the interminable email chain. You can be emailing people from within Zimbra, which is your email client, and you can decide to do click to call to initiate a call. It's got presence integrated, so you've got the little green dots, just as you have in Gmail, to see if any of those people who are emailing you are actually available to be called. And you can see, hey, this woman, she's emailing me all the time, but she's not even available to be called, so we'll drop her from the call. And this person's walked away. And so actually there's only 3 people from this email chain who are available to call. Let's have a call with those people. It integrates with your corporate address book, and it integrates with your calendar free busy. So you can know when somebody's available. So if you've been desperately trying to catch somebody for a call, find them easily. And if you're trying to avoid somebody for a call, you can have a conference call. It's got the soft phone integrated, and it also integrates with your messaging, so you can check your emails from your voicemails in the same place. And a lot of these things don't require WebRTC to be built. Like I said, our technology is really just starting to use WebRTC. But once it's built in WebRTC, it's just that much easier to make these things happen, integrate them with other applications, and make it all included. So with that, I want to thank everybody and open up the floor to questions for Mark.
Yes.
Is any of this using similar technology that BitTorrent uses, where it's peer-to-peer and adjusts for low upload and high download speed?
No, not that I know. Yeah.
So first of all, thank you very much. It's very cool stuff.
I hope we hit the right level.
Yeah, no, it's extremely exciting stuff. This is one of the biggest disruptions coming to the web in a long time. But where I'm a little confused is the signaling layer. I get how two browsers can talk to each other. I mean, it's not simple, but it does require all this server component. What is that server component? What software runs to enable the firewall jumping and the
as I said, from a standards perspective, you're basically free to invent your own, right? And for simple stuff, companies have done that. But I think where it will gravitate to is either SIP or XMPP. So when you ask, well, what is required server side, it's either a SIP session manager, right, which is a SIP server. You could call that a phone system, if you will, or it's an XMPP Jabber server. And these protocols are similar when it comes to their ability to establish a session, but they're very different when it comes to the actual features they provide. So in other words, SIP is really made to replace a phone system. So you have all these features like call on hold and transfers and all these other things that you would expect in a phone system. And XMPP is optimized for chat, right? But you can do Jingle, which is the way to do this over XMPP or with SIP. And again, most companies marry those two. So Cisco did this. They have a SIP server and an XMPP Jabber server. We do that. Microsoft is the big company that didn't. They basically decided to do chat over SIP. And the standard on the SIP side allows for that. But again, the XMPP protocol is way richer and more mature for that, so that Microsoft had to extend the standards to make it work, right? And then it turned into a Microsoft protocol.
So I guess, sorry, just to follow up, where I'm confused is, let's say I develop a website that allows two users to communicate with each other. Do you envision that I would be running that server that does the Jabber stuff, or is there going to be someone emerging who is going to control all of that? Is that going to be Google Plus then?
Well, I mean, there needs to be something, and I'm sort of a bit careful because there is, I think, an option to do this completely peer-to-peer. But I think under normal circumstances, there needs to be a backend. And yes, Google obviously thinks that they can now build these websites with all these cool apps, and the backend is Google, like with Gmail and with everything else, Google, right? And in an enterprise context, this is your new enterprise infrastructure, right? As opposed to buying a PBX, your old Avaya, or forbid you still have a Nortel box somewhere. You replace that with a piece of software that is capable of doing that. And you then build an infrastructure. And that's exactly what Red Hat did with us. They had a Cisco infrastructure before, and that's a product, right? You get that thing called a phone on your desk with a manual. Here is how you use it. But what Red Hat wanted is a platform for innovation. An infrastructure that was standards-based and open, that they could deploy globally, and then give the power to their employees, to their many engineers, to say, if you want to connect this or you want to connect that, right? We have an infrastructure that allows you to do this. And that's why I think this is so powerful on the enterprise side, right? Because Skype doesn't work for enterprise. You can use it as an additional means of communications if you don't have anything else that works, but you can't replace your phone system with it. But with this, you can. Yes?
Yeah, there's been soft clients, some soft client phone clients for a long time, and adoption's been pretty poor. Why do you think it's going to be? Do you think there's something different about WebRTC that's going to?
I think that adoption has been fairly poor on the desktop, right? There was sort of this idea that you could replace a phone with a laptop, and that hasn't really worked. Even Microsoft, when they introduced Link in the beginning, they very much thought that that's the way it's going to go. And very soon they realized that they had to, have a contract manufacturer to manufacture phones. Right? So now we have Microsoft phones. So I think on the desktop it hasn't really worked. I think on mobile devices it's an entirely different story. Here's why. If you have sort of a knowledge worker, an employee today, right? They need a laptop, they need a smartphone, a tablet, and a real phone. And you add it all up, and it's too much. So which one of these devices is going to give, right? And I think the phone is the highest priced, lowest value device you got, and it's glued to your desk. If you can do the same thing on your mobile device, and when you walk into the building, it connects on Wi-Fi, right? And it's your phone. It's your in-house roaming device. You walk around the building, and it's your phone. You have it in your pocket. And as soon as you walk out, it stays connected on 4G, so that you're reachable under your enterprise number, no matter where you are, and you can dial internal calls from wherever you are. And up until now, the development of these native apps, soft phone apps on mobile devices has been tough, because the environment on Android is entirely different than it is on iOS or anything else. And even inside the Android world, it's quite different. So from an investment perspective, if I look at our company, we couldn't do this. There's no way we could start building this from scratch. But with this, you can. So it's a new world.
And to echo Martin's point, I think consumerization is really going to drive it. I mean, yes, cell phone clients have been around for a long time, but we're seeing so much IT change driven by the consumer experience. And Martin said, because this is so much more mobile-centric, I think it's going to be driven more by the users. I don't think users are ever really screaming for smartphone clients, but they are screaming for more BYOD support, and they are screaming for better mobile experience. So I think that's also going to contribute to driving it.
Yeah. Yes.
So my understanding is this is something that is done from one browser to another browser. Is there any possibility that it's going to, have a real-time connection between browser to a real phone?
That's a brilliant question.
Yes.
Yes, I think you hit it on the head, exactly. And, I actually asked the standards guys exactly that question. And if you're the phone manufacturer, it's sort of been a tough choice, right? Because, you need to be interoperable with something that diminishes sale of phones. But I think this will inevitably have to happen. And the bottom line is that, in a lot of cases, it's a codec issue. So as long as WebRTC is mainly focused on VP8, it's tough to find VP8 support for video in phones. H.264 is a lot easier. But on other voice codecs, WebRTC supports G711 as a mandatory codec, and that is the vanilla codec that is available in every phone. So that, yes, I absolutely think that this will happen, that you will see interoperability between a variety of devices. Without that, I think the utility of this will be greatly diminished, and it will become an niche technology at the end.
So you can, from the browser, ping a number, and it will just know how to route you through to that number.
Yeah, it's as Chrissy said, if you have a website, it's your corporate website, right? And either for support purposes or for sales purposes, for whatever, you basically have a button there that allows people to click and call. And then it would directly connect to your enterprise system, bypassing Verizon or whatever the carrier is. If you want to be able from a browser to make a call to a PSTN number, then someone has to pick up the cost, right? And that probably isn't going to be available broadly, right? But that technically, yes, it would be possible. But I think the more likely app is that you would call to a defined number, that companies would make themselves reachable this way. Right?
Because right now if you have Google Voice, then that's what it does. Talk to the
Yes,
browser.
exactly. Yeah.
And the user ends up picking up the calls, so I think that's going to end up being the case.
Okay.
And it will not eliminate the PSTN network. That's going to stay with us forever. But I think that more and more call volume is going to move IP. And the interesting thing is that the call quality doubles. When you use a normal phone, it uses G711, which is pretty lousy quality. You can do G722 with the exact same bit rate, but twice the quality. And that is audible. And you demonstrate this to people who are used to an old phone system. They suddenly make a connection. It sounds like CD quality voice. It's a complete different experience.
I have a question. So with any new technology like HTML5, there's initial excitement, there's a slump, right, like we're at right now with 80,000 coming back. And then slow growth again. Do you see a reason for a slump that's coming forward? Or do you see?
You subscribe to Gartner, I assume. I think it's really hard to predict what will really happen. But yes, I think most technology adoption cycles work exactly that way. So yes, it's likely. I think we're not there yet. This is something that is new right now, and what the world exactly turns this into remains to be seen. I think with like with everything else.
Well, sort of related question: the incumbents, Verizon or the FCC, have a lot at stake here. And could there be not technical obstacles, but more regulatory obstacles, even though it's all internet?
I think today this is all unregulated,
Right.
and to make it unregulated, you basically have to say, this is not for 911, right? You cannot use this for E911. And as long as you do that, it's sort of an additional thing that doesn't interfere with this other thing, and that works just fine. But if you're really after replacing phone systems, then specifically inside of enterprises, you don't get around 911. And with SIP, this problem is solved, right? Everyone who offers voice over IP in an enterprise context has this solved. And carriers internally use all SIP. So if you look at the long distance traffic, right, inside the US and outside, it's basically all SIP. There is no TDM going on anymore. So that at the end of the day, this just comes down to how this is charged. And landline access became practically free, right? I mean, this is not, so the battle is on the mobile side. And yes, there are carriers, Google, I think with Android 2.3, built a SIP soft phone client directly into Android, so that you didn't have to load an app. You could just put your credentials in, and it was built in, and it would make calls this way, right, every time it could. And if you look in Jelly Beans, right, it's gone. Well, why is it gone? Not because Google wanted it out, right? So yes, there's absolutely discussion going on, but you can load an app and do it yourselves. And I think with 4G coming in, that is really the enabling technology. I mean, we've tried many times to make VoIP calls over 3G, and it works, but it's a crapshoot. Specifically when you're in a densely populated area, the cell is full, then the latency is just not good enough. With 4G, it's not necessarily just a bandwidth issue, it's a latency issue. 4G gives you totally different latency. So that with 4G, I think you get probably better experience than you get on the GSM channel. And it gets really interesting. Yeah.
Just have just one quick question. So with Skype, there were talks about how they're obliged to regulations of how they can tap into communication. They don't really admit to that, but there are reports of that going on. In the API for WebRTC, what kind of security is built in? Like how feasible or not feasible it is for someone unauthorized or otherwise, access your session.
Well, with Skype, you don't really know, right? Because it's all encrypted and very secret, and therefore, you don't really know. So that's the bottom line. With WebRTC, it is by default SRTP encrypted, and that runs through, regular certificates, right, with the usual encryption that you would use for anything else that's secure. So in that sense, it's your security as opposed to Skype's or Microsoft's.
You can add additional layers on top of that. I think, once you get into environments where people
Is there
want
another
that
question on there?
Yeah, I just wanted, it seems like the primary application would be customer service or whatnot, where you're on a website and or do you see something?
I think, yes, that is probably a very obvious case, but I think it goes way beyond that, because I think what you mentioned is sort of an outside-facing website, right? And you can have instead of a contact center, you have, a web client. I think that what Chrissy showed in terms of, what we call communications enablement of productivity apps is an even bigger thing inside the enterprise, because now you can take, your favorite CRM app or your favorite document management app, your social networking app, your email, your whatever app, and bring communications enablement into it. Right? Because every app basically starts out with I can log in, and then inside of every app you create a profile one way or another. And as these apps go along, they add richness to these profiles. So you have avatars, you have rich contact information. These profiles get bigger and bigger. The problem is that every app has its own. So I have a profile here, and one here, and one here, right there. And users don't want that. You don't want to maintain more than one, right? The profile represents you, and that's what you use to do business, and one is enough. And therefore, you need integration, communications enablement, so that across all these apps, you have one profile, you have one login, you have one presence, right? You have one activity stream, you have one reachability, but you would like to do it from the context you work inside of right now. And I think that's the trick, right? And I think inside an enterprise, that will start to replace your desk phone, because now I can do more inside my context, my app, than I actually could before. And then I can federate in my business partners or my customers, and I actually can click and establish a video call. Because video today is basically an inside an enterprise thing. If you want to establish a video call outside of the enterprise, you can't, right? Nobody knows how to dial a video call, but with this you can. And I think that's it. That is where the utility or the value of this really comes into an enterprise.
I have a question. So, what's a good resource if you want to use the APIs and start working on this stuff on your own? You mentioned Mozilla and Chrome.
Yeah. I think the starting point is WebRTC.
WebRTC's website. Yeah, I would go there. You can get most of the information there. You can contribute to the code. And these slides will be put up on SlideShare, and as well as a list of resources. But go straight to the WebRTC website. It's very robust, and they've got a good discussion.
To connect into the previous talk, if you go to GitHub, you find more and more software around this. There are more and more companies. I think that the client side will explode. And it's absolutely true that Flash is going away. The whole opportunity to use this for screen sharing hasn't really been explored yet. But you can build, entire web conferencing apps with WebRTC in a much simpler way. You can build, web conferencing front ends with this. All of this hasn't been fully explored yet. So there are tons of resources on the web, and it's kind of changing weekly.
Do you know if these technologies have already been used? Because we were talking earlier, for example, in like Google Plus for Hangouts and also FaceTime. Do you know if they're tied into that?
Well, Google Hangouts is an OEM from a company called Video, and that is something quite different. And FaceTime is inside sync-based, okay, but it's an Apple walled garden in that sense, so that you it's very difficult to get in and out if you're not using a FaceTime client. But FaceTime in and by itself is, as far as I can tell, fairly standards-based using SYNC.
If you want to play around, Conversatio actually offers a sort of WebRTC Lite, and obviously they published everything they did. You can go, we'll share the links. Conversatio does offer a good way to play around with the very basic. Firefox Aurora, obviously it's fully integrated with Firefox Aurora, so you can play around there. And then in terms of companies that have done small things, Fresh Tilt Soil has a video chat widget that you can pick up and play with, and not Conversation. Twellophone is actually just a kind of cool toy where you can use your Twitter handle for a WebRTC-based phone.
And Google I/O is right around the corner, right? And I expect the Google guys to show a bunch of new things
Yes.
during their conference.
This will blow Twellophone out of the water.
Any more questions, folks?